买家具选豪派，罗兰港豪派家具免费。买家具选豪派，罗兰港豪派家具免费送货到家。电话626-624-6666，626-624-6666。
大学本科及就业主流趋势、建筑装潢、深化工程、游戏艺术、产品开发等等，都以全面与3D 结合，争取大学及就业申请优势。学3D，请找华人唯一官方授权及证书颁发3D 权威曲老师，616-825-0690，616-825-0690。
Hi, everybody. My name is Longji Lu. I'm an attorney based in Los Angeles. And it's actually this issue that's going on, affecting a lot of families in the US, especially Chinese families. What issue is that? The issue actually is a lawsuit, to be precise, 2 lawsuits that are currently being appealed in US Supreme Court. So both lawsuits actually are about school admissions, especially those elite schools like Harvard and Yale. So in order to have a very meaningful, in-depth, most importantly, heart-to-heart discussion on the matter, I invited attorney John Bailey and also Dr. Paul Canedo to join me to have this discussion. If you are a Tiger mom, you have to watch this episode because this episode is specially for you. Tiger moms, get ready and enjoy the show.
That's right.
Yeah. Paul, you want to introduce yourself a little bit?
Yeah, so my name is Dr. Canedo, and I am just privileged to be here with Attorney Liu today in California here. And this is an issue that is very pressing and needs to be addressed and talked about. And we're going to give you, all the necessary details that you need to know and coming from various angles. So we're excited to be here.
So, and this is John. I'm also privileged to be here with Attorney Liu. Excited to be on the show. And I'm ready to bring my perspectives on this issue.
That's right.
Okay. So the idea actually is about whether or not affirmative action should stick. So what is affirmative action? Affirmative action actually, in essence, means that those schools such like Harvard or Yale, they can see race as a factor in school admission process. To be more specific, say that I'm Chinese. Well, I am Chinese, right? If I want to apply for Harvard Law School, I may not have as much of a fair chance as opposed to people from other races, right?
Yeah.
So, Dr. Canedo, can you
that's pretty much the essence of affirmative action, right? Is to try to have a diversity, right, or a diverse pool of people. But the main aspect that you look at in order to achieve this type of diversity is race, right? Now, the question then becomes our Constitution here in America strictly prohibits, looking at somebody's race, the color of their skin for any type of, especially when it comes to college admissions, any institution that is receiving federal funding, right? And this is a higher level, higher institution, higher education institution. And thus, there has to be a place where, a line is drawn. Where do you draw the line? You're trying to achieve diversity, but at the same time, there are people who have, who qualify and they have the necessary merits. But if you look at them based on the color of their skin and you exclude them, then that becomes a major issue. I mean, Mr. Byerly, what do you think?
Well, I think it is a delicate balance between promoting diversity and giving opportunities to certain people without making it such a strong factor that other groups of people have no chance or no fair chance. Yeah. And when you look at the population breakdown, obviously we have certain groups that are overrepresented in these colleges and other groups that are 2 or 3% when they might be 20% of the national population?
My understanding is that Chinese people, well, my people, make up 5% of the entire population.
That's right.
In the country. But in some schools, or a lot of the schools, we make up almost 50% of the student population. So I think that's actually where the affirmative action came in, basically saying that we have too many Chinese, right? If we do not do something about it, so those schools, like schools including Yale, Harvard, will be way too Chinese, meaning that other races, other ethnicities will not be fairly represented in those schools.
Yeah.
Right? People will start speaking Chinese, will use instead of US dollars, will use RMB, the Chinese currency, right?
Yeah.
And everybody will start eating Kung Pao chicken, you know?
You know, it's yeah.
So, and I think that's the idea. Basically, is to make sure we do not, by we, I mean Chinese people, right? Get out of control. I guess that's the idea of it. You know,
and I think, you know, sometimes in the name of trying to achieve affirmative action, as you know, Mr. Liu, you just mentioned, you know, other groups are excluded, right? Such as, you know, the Chinese, you know, and I think in a form that kind of becomes what I would term reverse racism, right? Because on one hand, we're trying to achieve diversity, but on the other hand, we're also excluding a group that, you know, plausibly may actually qualify based on the merits. So then it becomes difficult as to what do you really do to find a good middle ground?
Yeah.
You know, and I think that's kind of the issue that the Supreme Court is wrestling with right now.
Yes, actually, to be more direct.
Yeah.
So is affirmative action the new Chinese Exclusion Act?
That's a bold statement, and you know, it's likely there may be some truth to that, and especially when it comes to the area of academics, and you know, in this sense, because I know in the Chinese community there is, you know, outrage as to, you know, Chinese who qualify based on merits being excluded, especially from good schools such as Yale and Harvard.
Well, I think particularly with schools like Yale and Harvard, they argue that things like being a legacy student can be factored in, while things like this case would argue race cannot be factored in, but race in itself, Supreme Court Justice Jackson is arguing, is a factor in being a legacy. She gives the example of a, let's say, white North Carolina applicant who would state in her background, I would be the 5th generation North Carolina University student because my family's been here since the colonies.
That's right. But that's when racism,
Whereas an African-American applicant to North Carolina also would have been, their family has also been in North Carolina since the colonies, but
there's no legacy.
Due to history,
that's right.
They were unable to attend North Carolina for those previous 4 generations. So the liberal justices would argue that considering, especially a school like Harvard and the impact that legacy admission has on their admissions,
and the leadership that, you know, you are afforded when you graduate from such schools, you know,
right?
society.
They're very similar considerations. Yet we're arguing that legacy should still be allowed to be considered, but not race. Yeah.
So I think you know, that's a very profound argument. In fact, when I read that, I thought about it and I said that makes so much sense, because then at the end of the day, it's all about trying to find the right system that helps to promote diversity, while at the same time, people who are qualifying based on merits are also looked at, right? And one of the things that, you know, I was thinking about was, you know, in a situation like this, okay, what would you say to somebody who does qualify, but yet they don't have the necessary background or the necessary skin color?
It seems like that actually the essence of affirmative action goes against the very idea of basic fairness, right? So I have good schools, you know, and because of the fact that I'm Chinese, you know, so I cannot get into, say, Harvard Law School, right? I have to probably go to UCLA Law School, you know. So in that regard, I feel that, at least the way I see it, I feel that affirmative action is the new Chinese Exclusion Act. And as there's a TV show on Netflix, it's orange is the new black. But I don't know if orange is the new black. I do feel yellow is the new black. What do you guys think? Right?
I mean, some may agree, some may disagree. You know, I think diversity definitely is a great thing, and it helps as far as education is concerned, because especially in the realm of education, you want to have people from a different background. You want to have people who represent different societies and different communities, because then that helps to broaden the thinking of many people rather than being in a particular, box, so to speak.
Yeah.
But then again, I also do understand, the other side of the issue where if, I do qualify, even let's say as a, obviously being a Black person, you may be looked at times based off of affirmative action. But there are, it'll surprise you that there are actually Black people that don't want to be chosen because of the color of their skin, but because of what they can also produce as far as their talents, their abilities, and those kinds of things.
Dr. Canelo, are you one of them?
I would say, as far as I'm concerned, personally, if you were to ask me of, what I think, I would say that, I definitely want to be looked at based on my merits, but I do understand that there are other places in society where I probably may not even be chosen if affirmative action wasn't included, by virtue of, the way the system is set up.
Well, say that if you were sitting on the bench in the U.S. Supreme Court, right?
It's a big deal.
Are you for or are you against affirmative action?
I think at this point, I would have to look at the arguments before I can actually make a decision. I don't think I am in the right place at the moment to make such a decision. But I think both sides really have good arguments. I think that the way the system is now, as far as there being diversity, there's been,
You're starting to sound like a mediator.
Oh, no, not at all. Not at all.
Supreme Court justice.
No, not at all. No. I think personally, the way the system is set up now, there has been a good, in some of the schools, that I have seen and, I've witnessed, there has been a good pool of diversity, right? But at the same time, schools like Harvard and Yale, the minority class is so small. Because if you think about it, somebody from, let's say, an inner city who has, let's say, a 4.0 GPA, if you pair them up with somebody who comes from the suburbs who also has a 4.0 GPA, it's actually not the same, because the type of 4.0 GPA they acquired is coming from,
Are you trying to say?
A school that is, possibly not good.
Which is it? Are you for it? Are you against it?
I think right now, I would say that I like the way the system is set up. I do believe that there are situations where race does need to be considered by virtue of the communities that, some, people of, some minorities find themselves in. But there are also situations where you should be judged based on your merits and not only because of where you're coming from. But I think it's not a black and white issue. I think it's very gray. And, we're still yet to find a system that is strong. So I would err on the side of caution.
So right now, in that sense. Right now, we're not the new black. We're gray.
I guess you can say that. We can agree to that.
What's your position on that? If you are sitting on the bench in the U.S. Supreme Court, what's your position? What's your vote?
I think the current system should more or less be upheld. There's tweaking that can be done, but I don't think the Supreme Court can do it on a national level. It should be school to school. Yeah. I know Harvard pointed out that their black admission rate would drop from 14% African Americans to 10% if this policy was overturned, which is obviously, that's almost 1/3 of a reduction. That's right. It's more than 25% of a reduction in African American students at Harvard, which is obviously a major issue, while it would only be 4% adding to the large majority of white and Asian students of Harvard who really, the classrooms don't need another 2% each of those two types of students to present an equal and representative student pool.
But why do we need diversity? What I'm trying to say though is that if we need diversity, should an MBA have like at least one Chinese player?
Well, universities are unique because first of all, you go there in your youth, your formative years, 19 to 22-ish. And second, it's a place of learning, while the NBA is a place to score the most baskets.
Yeah.
Or learning how to play basketball. Right?
I think when it comes to sports, I think when it comes to sports is a totally different thing. I mean, it's clearly based on merits. That's the whole point. Academics is based on merits as well, but there's a strong influence, based on a person who's teaching that. As versus, like, for example, if I go into a classroom where, I have, let's say, a black person as a teacher or an Asian person or whatever, sometimes, the person who's teaching it has a way of including their background and their way of thinking or their philosophy of life into that material. What I would suggest in this instance is I think race can be a factor, but it shouldn't be the factor. It should be one of the things that is looked at. Nevertheless, I would go as far as to say that if, let's say, you were to take race out, why don't you rather base the decision making on the communities that people are coming from, right? Because if you choose out of a pool of community of people, now you don't have to necessarily look at race. You can choose people from the inner city. You can choose people from the suburb. You say, okay, let's say we're going to take 5 people from, let's say, I don't know, a community where it's an inner city or whatever the situation is. I think that helps to alleviate the whole thing of looking at race. But at the end of the day, you're still going to get a diverse pool of people because many of the people in certain communities are fixed in terms of the racial dynamics.
Well, I don't want to create a rush to the inner city.
For sure. Definitely.
Let me ask you this one question. Say that you have a son and he's applying for Harvard Law School, as a white person, right? With the affirmative action in place, right? Obviously, the fact that he being white, he would be disadvantaged.
And coming from a home where his father is an attorney,
right? Yeah. So I mean, if that was the case, and don't you want your son to have a better chance to get into Harvard Law School without affirmative action?
Well, as a white person who's applied to law school in the past 6 years, I dealt with affirmative action, and I still felt that although my chances may or may not have been hurt, the critical diversity within the class is just more important than lowering my chances a bit. Coming from living in Southern California my entire life, I think diversity is the greatest asset in a place of education and a community.
In fact, my law school, speaking, kind of picking back off of what my friend here is saying is, even the law school that I attended also, there was a great opportunity for diversity. I was able to, mingle with friends who were, Hispanic, Latino, and I was able to pick up some Spanish, and I feel like it added to my repertoire of, legal education, versus somebody else who did not have that diversity. So I strongly do agree with, the diversity, but at the same time, you also cannot overlook qualifications and merit.
Although in theory, though, as it was being argued in Supreme Court, although those schools, including Harvard, I believe, also another school, they were arguing that race is one of the factors to look at. It's not the factor.
Yes, Michigan actually has a good system like that.
Primary factor. But
that's right.
A lot of times, that's what it comes down to.
A
lot of the students, they have the same qualifications in terms of other things, extracurricular activities, and that, right?
Yeah.
So actually, in a lot of situations, as a practical matter, race does become a determining factor, right?
Yeah.
Right? So, I mean, in that way,
it makes it difficult.
It makes it basically, it sort of changes everything.
That's right.
It's not like, although in theory, just one of the things I look at it, not the only thing, not the primary thing. But in actuality, that is the main factor you look at when it comes down to it.
Yeah.
And also one more thing I want to point out though. I feel that, I mean, as you were saying that the reason, the was affirmative action to begin with, right? There still is. It's because certain people from certain
people
races,
are overlooked. Yeah,
right? They actually they did not get the growing up, also their family background and what have you. They were not having the same opportunities as for people from other races. But if that was the case, I feel that, if anything, if affirmative action does stick Chinese people, my people, instead of having a disadvantage, right? We should have an advantage, because most Chinese people
are minorities as well.
not only we're minorities, we're first generation Americans.
That's right.
Me included, right?
Yeah.
So we came to this country. A lot of us, did not speak English, right? So if that was a factor you look at, instead of sort of losing points, we should be gaining points.
Definitely.
Right?
I agree.
Right? Do you think that should be the case?
I know that a lot of the argument for affirmative action, and this is usually compared to white applicants, is that, especially with like test scores and standardized tests, growing up in an English-speaking home, you're going to be presented with, you're going to be raised with a vocabulary in your developmental years. You're going to have a better vocabulary when you're 18 and 19, applying for college. But Asians, although they're being treated like white people for affirmative action, as Mr. Liu points out, they're raised in a Chinese-speaking household. They're not getting those advantages for the standardized tests and for their vocabulary. A lot of them don't learn English until they go to kindergarten, go to elementary school. That's when they learn English for the first time.
Yeah.
So these unique challenges of having recent immigrants, whether you're first or second generation, are very much present in the Asian American community, and that should be factored in to their admissions.
I think it should. Yeah, I agree. I think because the Asian community also is a minority in terms of at the college and the university level, and I think that's definitely something that needs to be factored in. I do agree with Attorney Liu that sometimes because race is on it, race becomes the main determining factor. But I think there can be some some guardrails or some guidelines that are placed so as to cause universities to look at a person's application in a totality, right? In totality, rather than simply looking at, one particular factor. So it's definitely a tough decision. I do, as we're reading the arguments, I'm like, both sides are coming up with great arguments, but, I'm looking forward to seeing, what the decision will be, what they'll say, and what the opinion is.
One more question before I let you guys go. So if Dr. King, Martin Luther King, if he were still alive, what do you think his position would be?
You go first, Mr. Barley.
I think he would be for the type of affirmative action we have now. It's not extreme. It's not, yes, it can be the deciding factor between two students on the marginal edge, but it's just a small leg up. You can look up the statistics of these schools. The underrepresented minorities aren't exactly getting in boatloads into these schools. They're 14% of Harvard, as opposed to, they're not 25 or 30%. I think every race still has a fair opportunity under the current system, and I think Dr. King would support it.
Yeah, I think he would support it, but in more of looking at things from the totality of an application. The reason being is, it was Dr. King who also said that he has a dream that one day, we will not be judged by the color of our skin, but but based on merits, and what we are able to do and achieve and produce. So I think, and as much as race is a factor, I think Dr. King would err more on the side of the totality of a person's application rather than simply on the color of their skin, because there's so much more to offer than just the color of my skin.
I know, but I think that he let's apply plain English rule, right? He was saying that every Jew someday will be judged not by the color of the skin, but affirmative action. The essence of affirmative action says we should be judged by the color of the skin as one of the factors, but nevertheless, we are being judged by the color of the skin.
I think affirmative action aims to promote diversity, and it just happens to be that diversity often stems from the color of one's skin, right?
I know, but I think that I have a dream. My understanding of that speech is that his dream is not diversity. His dream is equality.
That's right. But I think fairness is the context of his speech, right? The context of his speech comes from a place of fairness and not necessarily, okay, yes, we're only being judged on merits. But at the end of the day, the scale that is being used to judge is not equal. So fairness is the driving factor between being judged based on my merits. As long as the scale is fair.
Well, I think were his dream to be presented with the realities of college admissions,
that's right.
His dream would also be that these factors that disadvantage minorities before they get to college would be removed before they're applying for college. Right. So when his dream is faced with the realities of the current situation, I think he would support the affirmative action.
But even say that he does do that, do you think that he would think that because of the fact that most of the Chinese people are first generation Americans, instead of, not getting that disadvantage, instead of being disadvantaged, we should be getting that advantage. We should be benefiting from that as opposed to being hurt by that. Right? As you were saying that because people from different backgrounds.
Yeah, I think Chinese Americans should also benefit from that because, as I mentioned, they are also part of the minority. So in that sense,
basically, what it comes down to, it will be like white people actually would end up getting screwed in a way.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
That's why I'm saying that. That's why I mentioned that. Looking at it from a community standpoint makes it much better in the sense that it's like, oh, we're going to take group from this community, this from this community. That brings a lot of diversity because there are sometimes Chinese Americans and that find themselves in various communities, such as Black people or white people who also find themselves growing up in, let's say, in a Chinese American community, right? So I think when it becomes community based, that helps to alleviate the concerns as to race and becomes more solely based on choosing a diverse group of people, not necessarily a different color person or whatever the situation may be. That's how I would go about it if I was deciding this. But hey, thank God that I'm not, right now, not on that.
So my understanding is that if the position for both of you actually is the same. So you are for affirmative action because you think that diversity is more important than basic fairness.
No, not more important, but diversity is important. I think it's good to go to a school where there is diversity, but it shouldn't be the only thing that's driving education.
I know, as long as it is being considered as one of the factors, you're sort of like, you lose the very idea of basic fairness, right? Because I cannot pick and choose, what color of my skin would be before I was born, obviously. Even after you were born, obviously. It's not something you can change,
you can
right?
never know.
Michael Jackson tried. I don't think he was successful, right?
I think a few questions and answers on a multiple choice test is a bit more arbitrary than it's like your background.
Exactly.
So yes,
it's not black and white.
We're not picking people with 2.0s or people with 4.0s. If somebody with a 3.9 gets over someone with a 4.0, I don't think it's the end of the world to fairness.
Yeah. Well, I guess what comes down to really is that if, I guess one of the factors probably that would affect people's decisions or positions is that, which race you are. Right.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And also your background. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So any final remarks?
I think, this is a good case to look into. And I think this is something that, would definitely change the landscape of the future. I do understand, both sides and their concerns. And, I hope that a middle ground can be found.
Yeah. Well, I seriously doubt that. But
it's true.
Basically, there is a affirmative action or there isn't. Right? Yeah. Either you're pregnant or you are not. Yeah. Right? I don't think you can be like a middle ground.
Hey, but sometimes there could be a miscarriage.
Yeah, right.
Sometimes there's a miscarriage.
So, but as a Chinese person, I would want to say that I want to be very clear. I'm against affirmative action. I think that affirmative action is a new Chinese Exclusion Act. It is pure race discrimination. So I don't know if Tiger Moms, that if you're out there, if you would agree with me, if you're not a real Tiger Mom. Okay. Okay. So I guess that concludes today's discussion. We're looking forward to discussing similar matters with you another day. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
集送易集运致力于为全球华人提供中国至美国的邮包集运服务，优质海运含税包派空运，专属客服1对1，省钱又省心。集运5周，易达全球，选择集送易，购物更容易。在中国购物邮包集运首选集送易，集送易集运为您送货到家。现在下单有优惠，赶快微信扫一扫屏幕下方客服的2维码咨询下单吧。